my lecture on dams that we didn't finish last time. So in the topic that we finished was here when we were talking about fragmentation, physical fragmentations of rivers worldwide. So we were seeing how the building of dams around the world were going to change the free flowing rivers of the world with a major impact on the tropical area by taking into consideration the future projects that are going to be taken around the world. Wait. Here. We were talking a bit about the biological impacts of this, and I'm gonna delve deeper into it with a couple of study cases. And we also see how this conflict of the patterns of the potential of hydrological power that we need to sustain humanity, it is interacting with the biodiversity and sustainability of our free-flowing rivers worldwide. And here's where I finished last time, just giving you an example of, or showing you one of the last free-flowing rivers of Europe, the Vjosa in Albania. And just to have it in mind as one of the last wild rivers that is a national park European wide, and how important it is that system and the services that it gives to nature. So here is where we're gonna start today. So we saw the physical fragmentation of rivers in the paper from Grill and the last case study, and now we're going to go into the impacts on organisms. Specifically in this paper, in the procedures of the National Academy of Sciences. So Barbarossa and his colleagues check the impacts of the current and future large dams on the geographic range connectivity of freshwater fish worldwide. So how dams are affecting the fish biogeography globally. So I think I have already mentioned it, but freshwater fish are among the most threatened vertebrates globally. Dams fragment habitats, blocking migration, dispersal, and gene flow. That's a key assumption, and something that is key that you need to know. And I think we were seeing it in the Grill paper, at least in terms of the habitat fragmentation and the blocking of migration. There was some discussion on that. But here in this paper, they go further and they introduce the connectivity index for each species of fish and under their geographical range. And what they do is that they check the present state of the world's rivers connectivity, taking into consideration the around 14,000 existing dams, and they also do a modeling with the adding the around 3,700 dams that are planned or that were planned when this paper was published. I think it's 2020. 2019. So probably many of them are already made. Okay. So before we go deeper into this paper, I want you to, or all the room, be clear on this also key concept in limnology, which is diadromy. Diadromy refers to the movements that freshwater organisms do between two ecosystems, in this case freshwater and saltwater, to fulfill their life cycle. And there are varieties of it. There is anadromy, where most of the organism live most of their lives in the sea, but migrate to the freshwater to breed. Does anyone knows an example of these guys? Like there's like one that is really common here in Europe and is usually consumed. A fish. Salmon, yeah. Salmon is the most known anadromous fish. So they grow at sea, The adults go back to fresh water, to the headwaters of rivers. They lay their eggs on. The adults die, and the larvae and the juveniles grow at freshwater, and then they migrate as juveniles back to the saltwater where they grow and they complete their cycle. And there are catadromous fishes where they do the opposite. And anyone knows an example of a catadromous fish? They're not so common. But the eel. So the eel is a catadromous fish. It's a highly endangered fish in Europe, specifically. There are like heavy fines now, European wide, for anyone who gets larvae of eels, because basically it's not possible to reproduce them in the lab. Actually, the life cycle is not fully understood. Where do they lay their eggs, and in which part of the sea they reproduce? So they are highly endangered, and due to all the fragmentation of European rivers. But they are really expensive, and 1 kilogram of eel can cost like 25 euros nowadays. So it's even more expensive than salmon, and there's a lot of gangs and organizations that go after these pricey fish. And then we have amphidromine. Well, amphi, as the name entails from the Greek root, amphi is boat, and dromos is movement. So they do movement in the two sides. And what this entails is it's particular because they are not completely doing the reproduction either in the fresh or the salt water. Actually, they do migration between both of the waters, but not for the purpose of breeding. So what we're having is cases where the fish or the snails or shrimp travel as juveniles inside freshwater just to grow, but they reproduce in other environment. So why did I need to explain you this? Is because the authors of the study case that we're seeing use the differentiation between the two types of life cycle, non-diadromous and diadromous, to do their global modeling. And they did that because there is a heavy difference between the rivers that a diadromous fish needs to complete its life cycle to a non-diadromous. Basically, because the diadromous fish only or mostly need short coastal rivers to reproduce, rather than the non-diadromous where they do their whole life cycle inside rivers and they inhabit the largest body of waters in the world. So they did the two different analysis. So here in the top we have the present scenario with around 40,000 existing dams, and in the scale of colors we have the mean connectivity index in percentage. The bluer it is, less connectivity. So the fish can the connectivity index is measuring how much of a fish species range remains connected after dams fragment the river network. So the bluer it is, less connected, yellower or redder, higher connectivity. So currently, for the non-diadromous organisms, this is the picture. We have higher connectivity in the tropic area, so Southeast Asia, Congo, and South America, and also the boreal ecosystems, both in Europe, North Asia, and North America. And for the diadromous species, they are really important. What kind of organisms do we have mostly in these rivers are diadromous, because the diadromous species are heavily reliant on the temperate system with the snow melts. So salmon is the most is the species that we find most in these areas. Northern Russia, some coast of Europe, and the north of Canada and Alaska. So that's why we have this heavy importance of these organisms and a lot of free rivers running in these faraway parts of the world. Now, when we include the 3,700 planet hydropower dams in the future, what we're seeing is that there's gonna be a lot, or there's a lot of development planned for South America and the entire tropics, and mostly there's gonna be a lot of, or a big loss of connectivity, precisely in the Amazon basin, the Congo basin, and parts of Southeast Asia. And for the diatomous species, there's going to be some changes. It's going to maintain kind of a similar pattern, but we're going to see it at higher resolution in some further slides. Now, this is the difference between the future and the present, and basically is summing up what I was telling you, that the largest projected declines are in the Amazon, the Congo, the Niger, the Salween, and the Mekong. And now we're zooming in into the specific basins. So we are here seeing the Amazon catchment, and we're seeing white and red dots. The white dots are the present dams where they are, and red we're seeing the future. And when we're seeing the connectivity of the entire system for fish, only for the present dams, we're seeing a good picture of around 70-80% of connectivity. But when we include the future dams into the picture, we see a huge decline, around 30-40%. You see the red dot here and the dot here, or the line in the box plot. That's the change for the future in the Amazon, which looks really grim. Similar picture from the Congo, a bit less change, but still a big loss of connectivity for that system. The Mekong is already affected, but it will be even more affected. Same as the Niger. And this is for non-diatomous species. And now we take a look of the diatomous species. In particular, for their life cycle that we were discussing, they are highly sensitive when we when a dam is put close to the sea. And this example is really particular. This is Papua New Guinea, the Purari River. There's a future planned dam to be done, and it's going to be close to the outlet to the sea. Right now, it has almost, or has 100% connectivity. It's a pristine river, and they're going to set one close to the outlet to the sea. And look how is the connectivity going to change in some years when the dam is built. It's going to be almost zero. So for diatomous species that are key for an insular river, because diatomous species are a higher share of the biodiversity in small insular rivers like Papua New Guinea, this will be a big problem for everyone, not only for biodiversity, but also for the communities that live of the fisheries of this and all the ecosystem services that depend on it. And similar things we see with other rivers worldwide in terms of diatomous species. When the blockade or the dam construction is near the mouth of the river, we see these changes of connectivity. Also here in the Salween, this is Myanmar, also the similar picture of change. So regarding this study, conclusions is that dams fundamentally reshape freshwater fish biogeography, fragmenting species ranges and collapsing migration pathways at a global scale. And future hydropower expansion will shift fragmentation into the tropics, threatening the world's most diverse and fish-dependent river basins. And then here's where planning comes forward. Well, so what do we do? We now understand that dams create fragmentation and have huge impacts on organisms. We're talking fish here, but not only fish, depends on rivers. We're talking about of the top of the food chain. If we take fish out of the picture, then we break the entire system. So what can we do? There are things that we can do, and we're going to talk further about management possibilities regarding dam planning and construction. So modern dams nowadays, we have, this is an example of a dam recently built in the Elbe. So we're talking about Germany. And what is currently done in modern dams is this, fish passages. This in particular is a fish ladder. Here is how it commonly works. This is the reservoir, this is the dam, so the block of the longitudinal flow, and then we have a ladder that goes from the reservoir down to the continuous river. And below there we have flow coming out of the reservoir, and the flow attracts the migratory fish. And in this case, we have salmon as the migratory fish because it's a species of high importance in fisheries and conservation. So a lot of these are built and designed for them. So the flow comes and the fish jumps from pool to pool. You see the white structures are each of these lines here. So the fish jump and it managed to come up the ladder. So that's why it's a ladder. So it's a water ladder that is built. That's what engineering solution to have fish passages. But these don't come without complications. First, they are engineered for mostly big species of salmonids, but those are not the only fish that need to move around a river to survive and to maintain an ecosystem. They are important in terms of fisheries and for recreational fisheries and human consumption, but they are not the only fish that sustain an ecosystem. And so many other species are lagging behind from the possibility of jumping through the ladder. The other thing is that they are hotspots for predation. So actually birds and otters and many other animals learn about the ladders, and it's really easy for them to prey on the fish when they are inside of one of these boxes. So sometimes it's not a solution, can be also a problem. But well, let's say that is better than nothing. And then we also have kind of funny approaches. And is this is a this is a news from some years ago. Is a salmon cannon. So basically what they do is that they take fish from the bottom of the river, so below the dam, and when they're, for example, this dam which is too big to make a ladder or too steep to make a ladder, what they do is they take it inside a truck that has a system with a pipe that sends pressurized water through a tube and sends the fish jumping out of the salmon cannon. This actually working in some parts of the USA, but this is really expensive and it's not really feasible to maintain a global problem. I don't think there will be any moment where every single river is going to have a fish cannon to send fish around. The other thing that people do is restocking. So restocking is basically breeding the fish inland in ponds or artificial systems, taking the larvae and putting it up the reservoir, so up from the physical fragmentation. What is the problem of that? Basically, it's a lot of human intervention, a lot of maintenance, effort, money, and it can work for some systems, but not a global scale. There's no restocking program that can solve a dam in the Amazon or the Congo in the future. Maybe it works, and it has been working in small rivers in Europe and North America. And there's a good summary of the problems that fish restocking has on this paper from Agostinho, who see it from more of a global south perspective. What I'm telling you, that it's okay, it's a solution maybe for Europe and North America, but not for the tropics, because we have orders of magnitude bigger rivers and with higher biodiversity. And also when we do fish restocking, we are messing with genetics. We take only a few fish to reproduce in a facility, and the fish of only 10 or 15 fish, the I mean the the kids, the the offspring of only 10 to 15 fish are used to restock an entire population of a river. So we are creating a genetic diversity problem. So there's a lot of inbreeding in this kind of situation of restocking. Also, when we have 40 or 50 species of fish, which fish are we restocking? Only the big ones? Only the one people like? Only the ones that people fish? Only the ones people eat? Or the ones that are important for all the ecosystem services of a river? Also, we can introduce pathogens and parasites when we are breeding fish in aquaculture settings, and we can bring them to the natural habitats. And is this sustainable in future scenarios? And with the global aspect of how dams are going to change the world in the future, as we were saying before. And are we maintaining fisheries or are we maintaining ecosystems, as I was telling you? So this is an important paper for reading this discussion regarding fish restocking as a management solution for dams. Okay, so what we now have been talking about connectivity, longitudinal connectivity, and how dams change that. But I want you to think this question with me and maybe adventure yourself to some answers. So what other fundamental change do dams do in rivers beyond connectivity? So we know it's a blockade where fish cannot like just move. But what else do a dam like? What else is changing? And we were seeing that at the beginning on how a dam works. So ideas on the floor? Yeah.
I think we said the nutrients and the sediments discharge the sea
Yeah.
lower parts.
The sediment is an important thing. Yeah. So, but for having sediment flow, what do we need? Okay. Yeah, those two are great ideas, and that's where we're going for. Is the hydrological changes a dam brings. Because when we are building a dam, we're not just making a blockade. We're creating a reservoir, and we are changing how the water flows in a river, not depending on the organism or the season or what the ecosystem needs. We're changing it depending on our needs for electricity. So organisms that have been living or evolving and adapting to a system, to a river system for millions of years, let's talk Amazon, let's talk the Elbe or whatever river that has been existing there, suddenly in the time scale of 20 years have a complete different scenario of hydrology. So the whole seasons are changed for them. The cues that the water gives them to reproduce are completely reshaped, not by hydrology and weather, but by human design. So here I introduce you to another key concept in limnology. We have already seen quite a few. We have seen Wart's 4 dimensions. We have seen Young's the flood poles. We have seen Vanote with the longitudinal river system. And now I introduce you to the natural flow regime from Poff. So what is he saying? He's saying what we were just discussing. That basically rivers are shaped by natural flow variability, not average flow. So it's not the amount of water that runs through a river, it's the variability of the flow. So the flow regime has different components to it. It has the magnitude, the frequency, the duration, the timing, and the rate of change. And these affect water quality, the energy sources, the physical habitat, and the biotic interactions. And in terms with all this together, it completely shapes the ecological integrity of a river system. So, management of a dam, of a river, must maintain or mimic the key elements of natural variability. So it's not only that keeping water in the river, but keeping the timing of the floods, the timing of the seasons, keeping the frequency of the events, keeping the duration, the timing, and the rate of change. So that's what natural flow regime entails, and what POF brings in this key paper and key fundament of limnology. And this is the foundation of environmental flows, functional flows, and ELOHA, which are frameworks that are used in water management for dam and reservoir management around the world. Basically to try to keep ecological integrity when we're talking about flow regimes, and to keep ecosystems working as usual. And this old graph actually comes from that paper, and it's really important because it's showing you that each river has a natural flow regime fingerprint, and that the processes and organisms respond to it. Each one of these is a different river. We have in this axis years, so yearly scale, and here we have the day of the year from 1 to 365. So we see a small variability between days. So the flow changes daily in a regular pattern, but this is also true in a much larger pattern when we're talking about years. So year by year change. So these lines in these two dimensions create a fingerprint, and this fingerprint of hydrological variability is the one that the organisms living in the river are adapted to. So if a fish lives in that river, it's adapted to that change between the seasonal change when we have high flows, low flows, and their life cycles are adapted to that. We're talking fish, but also the aquatic plants, the insects, even the birds needs to know or needs to adapt to these flows. And this varies a lot from river to river and catchment to catchment. And if anyone is gonna mess with the natural flow regime of one of these rivers, it doesn't need to take so much in consideration only the average flow that runs through it, but needs to keep these changes constant and known after they do a dam construction. And just to give you context of it, of how important is the natural flow regime of a river, I wanted to just show you this paper from Swedish rivers when they found that regulation of snow-fed rivers, so damming snow-fed rivers, affects the flow regimes more than climate change. So we're seeing that human-made activity, just a blockage of a river with a structure, is more important than a global phenomena in terms of changing the flow regime of an entire country, because we're talking about Sweden here, so the entire river systems of Sweden. So just for you to keep that in mind. Okay. So we're gonna go now into the final section of this lecture on dams, and probably I'm gonna keep it short for today's lecture. So we finish one lecture completely, and we start a new one next class. So, are all dams bad? We're seeing a really grim picture from the previous slides, but no, not all of them are bad. But mostly when we're talking about scale and who's making them and what effects it has. So here I wanted to give you some slides on the natural dam builders of the world, the beavers. And they're there's been a lot of news from them recently in Europe and North America because there has been huge efforts to restore them into their natural habitats. They used to be really, really common all around Europe and North America, but then around the 1800s there was a huge demand for their fur, their fur and the castor oil. So the oil that is, because they are really fatty animals, and the fat was used as medicine, as to light lamps in houses. And basically, only like a 10% of the whole populations remained after the huge purge of beavers all around the northern hemisphere. And that brings with it a lot of changes in our rivers and our landscapes. So cool news. Why are beavers being released into England's rivers? So interesting news in England. They have been started to restock them like 10 years ago from now, and they have had really good results. We're gonna take a closer look into what they have found in terms of the reintroduction. Also, there's big efforts in Germany now to restock them, and we're gonna see a specific example of Bavaria regarding that. And also, well, they are not only nice for everyone, they also bring problems, as we see in this news. Beavers are just being beavers. Friction grows between Canadians and animals. And what's going on in Canada? They are eating or bringing down the light post. So people are losing internet in the night, or losing the electricity because they chop down the wood and bring down the power lines. And also, they are so good at building dams, they have flooded like 2 villages in Canada. So that's why they reach the news. But these animals are really important. They are known as ecosystem engineers. This is another concept that was coined by Jones in 1994. And the beavers are a prime example of one organism that is an ecosystem engineer. What is an ecosystem engineer? It's a plant or animal that creates, significantly modifies, maintains, or destroys a habitat. And what we're seeing in this photo is a landscape that is not created by weather or by geological forces. It's created by an animal. This is a beaver meadow. So it's a stream with a set of a lot of dams built by a beaver that change an entire landscape, change its vegetation and the biodiversity that we find in it. And that's why beavers are ecosystems engineers. But we're seeing that dams are bad in the past few slides. But how come beaver dams are different from human-made ones then? In this review paper from Wall, who's basically taking a look of the major effects of beavers as ecosystem engineers, and it was focused in North America. She does this table where she gathers the physical and biogeochemical effects of beaver ecosystem engineering. And this is a lot of evidence, and these are basically the observed effects. So they do have an enhanced surface water storage. So there's more water stocked in the beaver meadow system. There's an increased hyporheic exchange because their dams are not built with concrete. They are built naturally, so they are creating a more exchange of water between the hyporheic zone. There's an enhanced downstream base flow. When we have the dams, we have more water flowing downstream. We also have enhanced overbank flow, so it creates a stronger flood pulse. So the water goes to the sites where it goes stronger. There's also attenuation of small to moderate peak flows, so it regulates the flow of the system. Creates rotation of particular organic matter. basically what we were talking about, dams working as traps for sediments. There's an enhanced denitrification, so changing the biogeochemical cycles. There's an increased floodplain soil organic carbon, so basically they're bringing more nutrients to the forest nearby. Formation of multi-trade channels platforms, enhanced resilience to drought and wildfire. This is really interesting. For example, in California, they did the restocking of beavers, and they found in the big fires they had, like, I think last year and this year they had big fires in California, and they found that some of the only ecosystems that were spared, that were saved after the big fires, were the beaver meadows, because they were holding a lot more of water in those systems, so it kept the forest moist, and they managed to survive the fires. Okay. And well, not everything is good. For example, increased methyl mercury concentration streams, so there are also getting higher concentration of metals in the ponds that they built. However, when we take out the beavers out of the system, then we have a huge waterfall effect, when basically the beaver ponds are gone, and then all of the characteristics or the effects that I told you break down, and we have a final loss of water quality, flow attenuation. We have lower biomass and biodiversity, because we lose something really important, which is habitat diversity. It's really different when we have one river flowing when we have a system of river and ponds that flow in succession. When we have habitat diversity, we usually have an increase in biodiversity. And this is not only true for river system, this is something known and well described in ecology in general. And one of the reasons, for example, why tropical coral reefs have such a high diversity is basically related with habitat diversity. All right. So now let's look at a specific case study with beavers, and the study I was telling you about the Eurasian beaver in Germany. So, a biodiversity boost from the Eurasian beaver, castor fever, in Germany's oldest national park. So what the study did, what they did in the study, was taking the Bavarian Forest National Park, as we see it in the map, and they picked their sampling sites as places where there's beaver habitats recently restocked, and they did a 3-layered sampling. They did biodiversity or whole ecosystem biodiversity sampling in the beaver pond, the forest, and the river around the beaver influence. This study basically examines how beaver-created habitats influence forest biodiversity across multiple taxonomy groups. As I told you. So let's go to the results. This Venn diagram is showing us the number of shared unique species at the beaver pond, the river, and the forest. And what is interesting here is that we have a lot more unique species that are only found in the beaver pond. We're talking about 196 species that are only present there. And in the parentheses, we're seeing 26. These are the number of species of conservation concern. So there's only more species richness, but the species that are kept in the beaver pond are more important for conservation. All right, that in that figure. And now when we look down on the specific taxonomic groups, on the species that they found, we see some really cool patterns. For example, small vertebrates and birds so small mammals and birds have the highest biodiversity at the beaver ponds, well above the river and the forest. So beaver ponds are not only really important for freshwater biodiversity, but also to keep the forest biodiversity around them. So they are changing the entire ecosystem. And when we see the specific groups, we see in this NMDS, we see that beaver ponds keep really specific groupings of organisms. So specimens that only, or species that only live around beaver ponds in different groups. For example, in the beetles, the birds are also completely different. In mammals, they are quite mixed between the systems. And basically what this is telling you is that the beaver ponds support distinct species assemblages, and their communities differ significantly from river and forest sites. So, in conclusion from this case study, we can say that beaver act as a powerful ecosystem engineer, creating ponds and dramatically increase habitat heterogeneity in forested river landscape. Their engineering of the ecosystem boosts the multitaxon biodiversity, and this in the same case increases species richness, gamma diversity, and produce a unique community assemblage for the different habitats. And that the beaver created wetlands or meadows from beaver reintroduction can serve as an effective nature-based restoration tool, supporting conservation goals in degraded riparian ecosystems. So beaver dams are actually a tool that can be used for restoration, and this has gained a lot of interest not only by the community, the scientific community, but also by governments. And now there are big efforts in Germany and the UK to introduce these nature-based solutions for restoration using beavers. I was just seeing that some colleagues are publishing PhDs in these PhD projects regarding this interesting nature-based solution. Okay, but that in terms of the dams made by beavers, which being natural and being in a lower scale have not such dramatic effects on connectivity. But what happens with the dams that we build? Actually, the human-made dams come with an expiry date. We might think that they're forever, but they're actually only last some decades, and actually its removal can be sometimes more expensive than its construction. Basically, because when you break down a dam, if there are human communities below, there's going to be a huge flow of water that might erase entire communities and ecosystems. And why do they expire? Basically because what we were talking about before with sediments. There's constant flow coming to the dam. This is a new reservoir. Basically it's completely sediment free. So we have just water. Then when it's started to operate, then we have in the delta, so in the lower part when the river flows, we have the coarse sediment depositing there, and then the fine sediment goes further down to the base of the dam. Basically because the bigger sediment is heavier, so it drops down faster in the water column than the finer sediment. And this happens from decades and decades depending on the geomorphology and the shape of the reservoir. And what we start seeing is a diminishing of the beneficial storage of water until it's completely collapsed and there are severe sediment impacts and basically the dam stops being profitable, so it stops doing hydroelectrical power generation, and it's just abandoned. And sometimes they just work as reservoirs for fishing and water, but also with limitations, because a lot of sedimentations also have effects on water quality. So what is the solution for that? It depends on where it's built, but one of them is dam control removal, as I wanted to show you in this short clip of dam restoration done in the US.
Pesto Barilla. So cremig, dass du nicht widerstehen kannst.
After the Barilla break there. Yeah. Well, this is a solution that has gained a lot of attention, also in Europe and worldwide. It doesn't work for all size of dams and for all of them specifically, but I just wanted to show you the Open Rivers program, which basically is a grant giving organization created to restore European rivers that have become fragmented due to proliferation of dams. So basically all the problems that we have been talking during this lecture, there is people that have gathered all the knowledge, the science behind it, and have make a fund to do dam removal around Europe. They have been doing projects all around, and just recently they started the removal of some dams in Ukraine. That was the latest grant that was given. So even though the country is in a state of war, they are still trying to do river restoration there. And with that, we finish the lecture on dams. I will upload these slides as I already did with the other ones. I just uploaded it today. And there's some just suggested reads. That's just for you if you want to do it. Like, I think questions shouldn't go out of what I have told you in the lectures. Any questions regarding dams and the topics that we have talked today? Clear. Then, thank you.